Hello and welcome back to How to Be a Terminal Pro. This is Jesse Shull, and in this video we'll be talking about permissions and changing them up with the terminal. So we can go ahead and open it up. I'm just going to go into my Documents folder here and create a file that we can work with. If I get a detailed list using ls-l of the contents of my directory, I can see some more information about this file. Right, so before we talked about permissions being on the far left, but we're going to go more in depth here to look at this. First, I'd like to point out that this part right here just shows the user. So I know that's me, JS, and this refers to the group that has ownership on this file. The permissions that are applied to the user group and everyone else is on the far left here. So the very first space here refers to the type of file. So it's a dash if it's a regular file. If it's a directory, it'll be a D. And I believe L is symbolic link. And then you have these things grouped in three. So the first three here refer to the user, what permissions they have. The second three refer to what permissions anyone in the group has. So I have another user account on this computer, JS2, which I believe is in the group staff. So they would have these permissions here. And these last three refer to anyone else. So maybe a user that's not on my machine, or if this file were on a web server, this picks out those permissions there. Okay, so within each of these three groups here, we have these letters, R, W, and dash. This means that the user has read and write permissions. So the user JS can read a file.txt, they can write to that file, but they can't execute it. So the third space here is for X, which is execute. I can see that anyone in the group, so maybe JS2, they can read the file, but they can't write to it. And again, they can't execute it. And then the very last thing refers to everyone else. So somebody that doesn't have an account on this machine, they can read the file, but they can't write to it and they cannot execute it. So if there's a dash there, that means that that permission is not allowed. So we can change these permissions using the command chmod. So the first thing I'd like to do is add a permission to the group. So we can do chmod, and then we have these short names, right? So we've talked about three different people that these permissions apply to. We have the user, so with this command we'll use U. For the group we'll use G, and for others we'll use the short name O. Okay, so let's say that we wanted to give write permissions to the group. All I need to do is say chmod G plus, and then whatever permission we want, and then specify the name of the file. So now if we LSL, I can see I have write permission for the group. And we can do that using for others as well. So O plus W. So now if we LSL, I see I have read, write, read, write, read, write. That's for everyone. And we can also just leave out this first part here to refer to all. So I can say, give execute permissions to everyone. So the A stands for user, group, and others. So if I hit enter and then LSL, I see I have read, write, execute on all of those. Okay, so we can also remove permissions by just using a minus instead of a plus. So for this one, I'd like to remove execute permissions from the group and from others. And I can do that by using chmod GO, so this is standing for group and others. You could also do OG, and then a minus sign, and then we'll take away execute permissions there, and then just specify the file name. So now whenever we LSL, I see I've taken away minus execute from others, which is this last three here, and the group, which is those three there. I can also remove and add at the same time by just combining the minuses and pluses that we've talked about. So let's say for the group, so this middle part here, they can currently read and write, but let's say I want to take away write access but give execute access. So I could say chmod group, we're going to plus X but minus W. So we're taking away write, but we're adding execute permissions to a file.txt. Now whenever we LSL, I see I've done just that. I took away the write permissions, but I gave execute permissions. So that is excellent. All right, we can also set exact permissions by using the equal sign. So let's see what we're working with here. Let's say I want the group to have read, write, and execute permissions. I could say chmod group equals exactly read, write, execute on a file.txt. So now whenever we lsl, I see group has read, write, execute. I can also just leave it blank to take away all of the permissions. So we'll lsl, and I see the group has no permissions now. And I can apply this to more than one set of people at a time. So I can give these exact permissions to the user, to the group, and to others all in one go. So let's do just that. So for user, I'd like to have just read and write, and then these are separated by a comma. For group, I'd like to have no access, and for all others, I'd just like to have execute access. So we press enter, we lsl. I see I've done just that. The user has read and write only permissions. The group has nothing. These three here are just dashes. And I see for others, they can only execute. All right, so that's excellent. And the last thing that I want to show you is just applying these permissions in their absolute form. And we can just use some numbers for that. So you can write chmod. And for this one, I'll do 444 and then a file.txt, and I'll explain this to you. So the 4 stands for read, the 2 stands for write, and the 1 stands for execute. So since I have 444 here, this is just giving read-only permission to the user, to the group, and to everyone else on a file.txt. So if I hit enter and then lsl, it'll just have R's for user, group, and others. Then if you want to give write or execute permissions, you just add them to this number. So let's say I want the user to be able to read, write, and execute. I'm going to use a 7 there because that's 4 for read, plus 2 for write, plus 1 for execute. 4 plus 2 plus 1 is 7. And then maybe I'll just have 4 and 4 for the others. So that means the user can read, write, execute, but everyone else can only read. We lsl. We'll see that, and that's exactly what we've done. We can also take away permissions by just using a 0 in place there. So now the user can read, write, and execute, but everybody else can't do a darn thing there. All right, and then I just wanted to add one more thing. So usually if you have files on a web server, maybe like images or just HTML files, those are usually 644. So 6 is 4 plus 2, which means read and write. So the user can read and write, of course, edit the files. And then 4 is for anyone in the group, they can just read, and anyone on the web can just read. And then you specify the name of the file, we'll lsl. And I see that it is just that. The user can read and write, but everyone else, anyone in the group or just anyone else in the world, somebody viewing it via a web server, will just be able to read the file. All right, and next time we'll be talking about editing files in the terminal. So I'll see you then.